Welcome to PM Express. My name is Martha Krentsolakwa. This evening we are talking about the broadcasting bill. If you're watching us right now, it's because you have access to television. And if you're watching us online, it's because you have access to some kind of internet. But in doing all that, do you think it is necessary for us to regulate the industry? I believe so. If we don't, we're going to allow so many things to go wayward, and we will pay for that. Now, in Ghana currently, as of June, we had 58 TV stations and over 130 radio stations, including community and institution radio stations. This is a huge number, and there is a need to put structures in place to make sure that we get the best out of it, including helping us to build our country. How do we do this? There is a need for a bill. There is a need for a law. There is a need for a regulation. And that is what we are talking about, the broadcasting bill this evening. It seeks to sanitize the industry. But is everyone happy about what is contained in that bill? We're going to find out more. And I have in the studio Mr. Yawedu Ayeboafo, who is very experienced in this field and is also director of newspapers at the Graphic Communications Group Limited, and has worked as an executive secretary of the National Media Commission. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
The broadcasting bill.
Yeah.
Is it a little too late for us to be thinking about that now?
Well, as it is said, it is never too late to do anything. I mean, the important thing is to recognize that when you need something, you work for it and get it, you know. Because indeed, in 1992, just before we entered into the era of the Fourth Republic, the School of Communication Studies, who had looked at the draft constitution at the time before we went to the referendum and saw some of the provisions on the level, we had organized, a seminar on the electronic media, particularly Professor P.V. Ansah underlined the necessity that we're going into an unfettered land, and therefore there were a lot of trappings and all that, and you needed some kind of regulations to guide you in entering into that field. Because you see, whatever anybody will say, the fundamental thing that each one of us have to appreciate is the fact that democracy is basically about rules and regulations.
Exactly.
You know, and so when people make rules, that is the essence of democracy. It is only when rules and regulations have been satisfied that the question of numbers become relevant.
But
for instance, that's why in an election, if only one person is standing, is declared unopposed. Exactly. Because that is the rule. You know, so here again, is about the provision of freedom of information. It's about access to channels of information. But then, the electronic, it's not that we're going into digital, that the resource becomes a little bit available. But at the current analog level, the spectrum is very, very limited. And it belongs to every one of us. Okay. But not all of us will have the means of accessing some of that distance to use it, and so therefore it requires that we make regulations so that when you get it, you know that it is a privilege for you and that you should use it in the interest of the rest of us.
But if you mentioned that Professor P.V. Ansah mentioned this long ago, what stopped us from starting? Did we start the process there and then, or it took years? Because if we now have a bill,
the problem, if you remember, I don't know how this thing, some of us were old enough at the time, and some of you were not old enough. And the point was that, people were more conversant with newspapers. Okay. And they felt freer on that one. In terms of the electronic media, even though as far back as 1977, there was the frequency regulation and this thing, and it has made provision for private participation in the electronic media. It appears because of the military regime at the time, nobody took notice of that. It's SMCD 75 or 77, but nobody took notice. Then we had a constitution that had made provision for the establishment of media generally. It did not, in the Constitution, it did not distinguish between newspapers and the electronic. It said media. And so the genesis of some of these things about the hastiness in our liberalizing stem from the fact of one day we woke up and there was a radio broadcasting, and that was Radio I, you know, by Dr. Charles Brebe. And this is what happened, you know, and the floaters of, they call it Independent Media Corporation of Ghana, had looked at the provision, and they had realized that there was that kind of freedom for them to apply for allocation of a frequency. And so they wrote to the frequency board. It was called the Frequency Registration Board, that they have identified a frequency that they wanted to use, and they didn't mind them. I mean, it's typical about some of our public institutions that, that they don't owe anybody any responsibility apart from those who appointed them and put them there. You know, so they wrote back to the people and copied to the National Media Commission, indicating that if by a certain time they don't hear from them, they will assume that they had approved it and they will use the frequency.
Yes.
And then they wrote back and said, you can't do that.
So they received the first letter.
Now they get reaction, but that they don't say anything. And then the date comes, and then taxi drivers are figuring with their knobs, and then some music comes on. Then what is this? It's a phenomenon, you know. And it broadcast for, I think, about a month before security, like, you know, seriously armed security people with, I think, the 33 drugs. They thought that it was some big something, but it was some small thing inside his room that he was using, you know, and busted the thing. The matter went to court. One court initially ruled against them. Another court ruled that, you know, the high court are of the same status, and one high court is not higher than another high court. And so one high court ruled that they should, another high court said that their equipment should be returned to them. But it was underlined that between newspapers and the electronic media, because of the spectrum use, there was a need for some level of regulation. That started all that. And so in the midst of the radio intervention, the government was compelled to open up. And I think that Joy FM is one of the beneficiaries of that rush. And so we as a country and as a people, we find ourselves like a military distant traveling, where sometimes they don't pick the signal that there's some storm, and before you are aware, you are in the middle of the storm, and it is tossing the thing.
You have to find your way out of it.
And so that's how we found ourselves, that we had opened the airwaves, but there were no regulations. So how do we go about it? There was some committee, it came out with some kind of but you needed a law to give meaning to those things. But somehow, we have managed within the last 20-something years to allow the thing to go on, and it is now that I think that we have all agreed. And in fact, the genesis of this bill is about 10 years old. It is taking us 10 years to come, and there was
just come to an agreement on what should go into the bill.
Not that agreement. Because you know the problem for us as a country and as a people, one of our basic problems is the fact that our constitution is such that only the executive will initiate legislation. You know, because any law that is likely to impact or impinge on the consolidated fund, nobody apart from the executive should raise it. And that's the reason why you haven't had a private member's bill so far. Because if you're a private member and you want to introduce, because we have met, the MPs from both directions. First, they were in government, they don't want to have anything to do with the matter, and they are out of government, and now they want to push they are pushing the thing, and then they come back and they are stalling the process. You know, but then the reality is that even if as individuals they were keen about it, they are constrained because of the constitutional provision.
That is,
for as long as it doesn't say there's a but. It says that the person presiding at the parliamentary meeting, if it turns out introduction of that law will be a charge on the consolidated fund, then you should not allow it to come from anybody apart from the executive. And one of the things, I don't know, you know, when they were debating the petroleum law, if you could remember, the government initially had agreed on the parameters of sharing. Then later they thought that but they were going to keep money, and therefore they wanted to take back. And then the minority, the PP was in the minority at the time, and they wanted to introduce some amendment. And the speaker at the time said that it would be a charge on the consolidated fund, and therefore he didn't allow that. And so you see, if even an amendment to a bill from the executive is not permitted, what about a bill which is drafted by outsiders or by private people?
Mr. Iwofa, I'll have you hold a bit, because we have Professor Kwame Kakare on the phone line. He's joining this conversation, and he has presided over the Media Foundation for West Africa for a number of years. He's out of there now, but he has experience and he can share with us. Welcome to the discussion, Prof.
Hello, thank you.
Your initial comments about the broadcasting bill, where we are now.
Well, there is a bill that is that was put forward for stakeholders' comments and discussions yesterday. That was one of a number of such forums that had gone on for the last so many years.
Are you tired of it already?
Again?
Are you tired of it already? One of so many.
No, we can't be tired of anything that has to do with democracy. We just have to keep going on. It's a question of patience and steadfastness and consistency. We can't be tired. We have to continue till we get what we think will be good and useful for the country.
What are you looking out for? What do you think will be good and useful for this country in relation to the broadcasting bill?
Well, the bill as it is, in my mind, is generally a good bill. I think that if it is passed, it will provide a very healthy framework, a legal framework for the operation of the broadcast industry in the country. Of course, there are still some points that some people contend with. There are some people in the industry who think that the restrictions to the number of radio stations or TV stations that an individual can own is not enough.
Okay.
So I'm sure such interests will continue to lobby, for instance, Parliament to see that what we want.
Is it a valid point?
From whose point of view?
From your point of view, with your experience.
You mean the restrictions of
Yes,
ownership?
the restrictions, yes.
I think it is a useful starting point. But I would also say that perhaps the numbers may be on the small side. Maybe if 3 radio stations per owner, I suspect is on the little side. Perhaps 5 should not be a bad idea.
Okay.
The number of TV stations, I think, should remain as they are, because the operations of TV are very expensive, and what we see in the private domain of television, you can see that many TV stations are struggling to fill the airtime with useful and relevant programs. So I think the TV side, the limitation should remain until the future maybe creates conditions for looking at that.
Prof, since you mentioned the restrictions, I would like to get Mr. Iwofa's comments on that one. Prof thinks the 5, if it's 5, it's okay. Restriction of radio.
Yeah, you know, I mean, those sometimes those are the areas that you may not be, everybody may not agree on the specific number. The important thing is the understanding of the fact that restrictions are very important, so that there's no monopoly and there's no monotony also. You know, because if one person owns so many, I mean, there's a likelihood that there will be repetitions of a certain sentiment. And so one viewpoint will be repeated 10 times, and you think that there's pluralism, meanwhile there's monotony of pluralism. You know, so I mean, in terms of specific numbers, I do not have difficulty whether it is 3 or 5, but I think that there must be some some standard about that, and that we should not just allow people because they have money.
And standards can sometimes be uncomfortable. Well,
I mean, no, you know, people, particularly, somebody came to my office today, you know, he said, it's radio this, and I said, what is your reach? He tells me, oh, the whole of Greater Accra, we reach the Buta region, and I said, you are running an FM station, you are standing in front of me, and you are proud that you are telling me that you are breaking the law. Because FM station is supposed to operate within a limited area. But you are reaching out, and we take pride. We take pride that our reach is far, when indeed that should not be, because it is not allowed that you have that, because that frequency could have been allocated to another person in another area. So sometimes, because of some of these background things, maybe as we speak, somebody has invested in about 6 radio stations already, and so when you come out with the rule and say that you should be limited to only 3, I'm already
invested. That is going to happen at the time we are renewing the license, right?
Yeah, it's going to happen, but you have the initial capital outlay has been deployed, and so you have put all your licenses there, and now they tell you that you can't have the 6, you have to have 3. Definitely,
and they are all thriving.
People are going to argue about that, but at the bottom of it is that we should look at the wider national interest. That is that in the best national interest, and not our personal interest, not in my interest because I'm the investor. Is there any sense in circumscribing the number of stations that an individual can hold shares in or whatever? Once that basic understanding is there, we can work and argue about which number might be reasonable.
Prof, are you still with us?
Yes.
If I want to have 5, I can have 5 by getting other people to get it for me, to stand in for me.
If you do that and the law catches up with you, then you will have to face the consequences.
I'll invest in them. I'll invest in their business, so I'll have an interest.
Yeah, you can have an interest, but there are limitations to how much percentage of an interest you can have in as many stations. You see, the principle that Mr. Ayeboafo is enunciating is a principle that we must abide by and go with. What is the national interest? And also in broadcasting terms, if we give you 2, 3, 4, how are they going to be diverse? If we give you so many, let's say you have one in Accra, you have one in Tamale, you have one in Bolga, and so on, do you have the capacity to broadcast in Dagbani, in Guruni, and do programs of a local character? Or are you just going to beam to all of these number of stations the same program? We are seeing this monotony already in so many ways. You see, so the broadcasting thing is not like selling kenke or shoes. It's a whole different industry which has so many social, cultural, and other implications that people who are selling shoes and kenke don't have to worry about, you see. So the state of any country has many values that are the basis for determining all of these principles in broadcasting. And the essential point is the allocation of the frequencies. Some people are saying that if we go digital, frequencies will be limited. Fine. If they are limited, so should we also encourage monopoly and monotony?
No.
If we wanted monopoly, then we shouldn't have kicked against state monopoly. I'd rather be under state monopoly than under private monopoly. Because with a state, I can vote a government out. With a private sector, no. You know, so these are principles. The point I was making about 2 or 3, 3 or 5, it's not like it's still pursuing. If people insist, fine, we can talk about specific numbers, but the principle must prevail, and the principle is whatever decision is taken must derive from.
Is the broadcasting bill as it stands look like the panacea to the to the numerous challenges we have in the broadcasting industry in Ghana?
Well, as it is, it provides the basis for cleaning up many, if not all, of the problems in broadcasting as we see today, because it provides the framework for regulation in a certain direction. And once again, we have to also consider whether or not the institutions that will be established for regulation will do their work. So, but as a legal framework, I think that the provisions in the draft bill, if the bill is passed today, they provide the framework and the basis for regulating broadcasting in ways that should be able to eliminate many, if not all, of the critical problems that confront broadcasting in the country today.
Okay.
Such as ethical problems and some, some of the things that the public is worried about. I think that this bill provides the framework to deal with that.
Okay, so you mentioned the ethical problems. I want Mr. Ibuafu to also tell us some of the critical problems this bill can get us to address.
Well, you see, some years back, when I was at the National Media Commission, we produced guidelines. You know, you are seeing the guidelines on broadcasting, guidelines on print media, and those things. Unfortunately, we could not get them passed by Parliament because there was no parent law. You know, you need a law, and out of that law, you develop the regulations and the instruments. You know, so this bill, if it is passed, will then give the framework from which, you know, like you have the Constitution. Out of the Constitution, you make enactments. Out of those enactments, you make regulations. The regulations are the ones that then give functional direction as to how things must be done. For instance, I mean, there's a question about local content. How much local content, what time, and all that. That, you see, this then says there should be local content. Then when you come to the instrument, then the instrument is going to look at that. When we say local content, what is local content? Does it mean a Yaku concert or whatever, that kind of thing? What does that mean?
It's well defined.
So you define that, and then you agree on the proportions. That, look, as a commercial we cannot restrict you to only say broadcasting Ghanaian films. There's a possibility that you have to, but how much of that can you do in a day as against what is from Ghana? When you are doing the news, how much of it, you have 30 minutes for news, how much of it should be local, how much of it must be foreign? I mean, these are, and so once the framework is available, then you go down to the regulations, then the regulation will go into the nitty-nitty. So that, I mean, for the leadership people or those in management, they will tell you about strategy and tactics. And so we can say, we want to mundanely give an example, we can say that the bill becomes the strategy, and then the regulations will be the tactics of implementing the strategy.
Do you think the lack of, or the absence of the bill or an act or a law is making bodies like the NMC not function properly?
No, in fact, the NMC, as at now, is limited in its role when it comes to electronic media. Because as up to this point, it's the National Communications Authority that has the basic responsibility of licensing frequencies, right? And no, I mean, it's more based on business plan rather than on content. But, you know, the electronic media, radio and television, it's not just a question of business. It's a matter of the human being. It affects us in so many ways. You know, it intrudes into our homes and all that. And so they are not, and that's why Prof give the example of Kinky, that if you want to sell Kinky all over Ghana, it should allow you, as long as your Kinky is good, people may buy, you know. Yeah, but so some that is the thing. And so those are some of the thing. Because the lack of a law, because you know people say, for example, somebody wants to say that you are decently dressed. There must be a yardstick that is judging you against. Otherwise, you cannot say whether you are decently or improperly dressed. So what is a yardstick? The law now becomes the standard yardstick. And so when we want to evaluate the performance of any electronic media house, then we're going to weigh it against the standards set by the law and the guideline. And so for as long as you're operating within that, we say, oh, you are doing well. You know, so the National Media Commission developed those guidelines, but they could not be passed into instruments. Now, with a parent law, for as soon as this bill becomes law, then MC can then go back to Parliament and lay those instruments, and then they become regulations that will be enforceable in law. As of today, is about moral suasion. I mean, you are looking at it more from an ethical lesson, and when it comes to the matter of ethics, it's about you. So if you do not consider that which you are doing as bad, nobody can, because we cannot beat you. We cannot take you to jail because when you go in, you want to undress yourself and go and walk by the streets there. Except that they say it is indecent exposure, because indecent exposure is a criminal act. But if it is not like that, but you are just exercising your freedom in a manner that somebody may feel offended, but it is not illegal, that person cannot do much. But at least as soon as the law is passed, at least we all have a basis that we as a people, this is the standard that we are looking for. And if you do not measure up to that standard, we can tell you that, look, your performance is not good enough. We hope that it will be the first step in sanitizing. It may take a little while to get back, because when you practice, you have done something for so long, it's not easy overnight, because as they say, the example of the sheep, you know, when you pen the sheep for too long and you open the gate, you see that they are still standing there. It is only when somebody goes in and they are wondering them, because they are used to standing at standstill, and then now there's an avenue for them to run, and they are not running because they don't know. They haven't when they get out, but when they will take time to bring them back in. That is the point. On this note, we'd like to take a break, talking broadcasting bill on PM Express. When we come back, we'll talk more about some of the concerns raised in the bill. Welcome back on PM Express. We are talking about the broadcasting bill, which ultimate aim is to sanitize this industry and make sure we have the legal framework to make sure everything just falls in place. We'll talk more with Mr. Yalbuidu Ayebafo, who is here with us in the studio, and we have Professor Kwame Kakare on the phone lines. But before then, there have been some issues already about it, and then the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, that is GIBA, has been raising some concerns. Its President, Kwesi Agyeman, has been speaking to us. Yesterday, he made some few comments I would like my guests to react. So we'll take that one and then we'll come back and talk more.
Chairman was speaking, he talked about when Radio I started and they had to hide. Now we have a lot of stations that are on air in the digital transmission space who don't have licenses, who have gone to other providers and put their content on. They are free to air. Those signals have to be encrypted. And the NCA knows that, the ministry knows that, but nobody is doing anything about it. So we are saying, before we even go into a broadcasting bill, let's implement or let's apply the law that is existing. Before you can be on air, you have to get authorization from NCA. Why are some people on air without authorization from NCA? And why is NCA not doing anything about it? Why is the Ministry of Communication not doing anything about it? These are matters that we feel must be addressed once and for all.
And Mr. Ayebafo, you heard him. There are laws that we are already not...
No, that's the NCA law.
Yes.
Yeah, because that is about...
Someone doesn't have the...
frequency, and I was telling you about somebody coming to our office and telling me how wide he is covering, and those are sometimes some of the things that you want to find out. You know, as he was saying, and he was with us at the validating the stakeholder this and yesterday. You see, it doesn't make sense that you are pushing for a law, but you are failing to implement an existing law. Because if the law says that you cannot go on air without authorization, and we saw it with Radio I, we decided heavily on them, And so where are we? Where are our military for? I mean, our security forces, are they going to sleep, or somebody has made them do that, or somebody has so much interest such that we are condoning, I mean, an illegality or something. You know, when you are faced with some of these problems, then sometimes you either have to resign yourself to what is happening, or just say that no, something has to be done. And indeed, it is important that we do not all just sit down and watch and lose hope and say that that is the way, but we must all come together and insist that the right thing must be done. And that the right thing is that everybody must follow law, because we cannot go back into the jungle, the era where the fittest destined, because we have surrendered some of our liberties in the hope that the weak will benefit from the strong, and the strong will not be too strong. And so as we share, you know, we must also ensure that the ground rules that we have laid for ourselves, everybody goes through the same rules, and nobody is above the law. That is what is meant by equality before the law. Okay. But if I can go on air and nobody speaks to me, and you cannot, then what is the equality that we are talking about?
There is no equality.
You know, so I share the sentiments of Giba in that area.
Will that be addressed?
Definitely. An illegality is an illegality. You know, the same box fraud that goes on because of their communication, they are arresting them. Yes. And so people who are doing that are similar to those people also. I mean, where did they get the frequency that they are using? Is it because digital is coming? Yeah, but digital also must be controlled. It cannot be, because if I want to use a certain...
They are actually free to air. They are not paying anything. They are not licensed. And they are on air.
And that is unlawful, and therefore we must not create the impression that we are a lawless country. And so we must bring them to book.
His impression is that if you are not dealing with this one, then this will fail on arrival.
No. And that also is a defeatist attitude. You know, it's like somebody stealing and saying that about you stole, they didn't do anything to you. How? It does not make you what you are also doing right. I mean, let's all work together to let this one work. And so that when the majority of us, because in the majority of situations, in all human situations, the majority would respect the law. Okay. There will be some few minorities that who may be in the fringes. Okay. If we do not have a common focus, how do we deal with the lunatic fringes? So we need to get focused. Let every one of us bring our mind to the fact that we want to sanitize the electronic media market, the business environment, and all that. And then when we have done that, it will be much easier for us to then tell those who are in charge that did you hear this the other time? What are you doing about it? And if they are not doing anything, we can force them to go and do something, because the majority is already doing what is right.
Thank you. Do we still have Prof. Kakari on the line? Okay, we've lost him, but you mentioned the local content bit of the bill. How about emergency powers? Is it not?
Yes, it's one
going to interfere.
I think that not necessarily per se, because the Constitution has made provision for emergency powers, so it is constitutional. So for as long as the emergency powers are declared and exercised in accordance with provisions of the Constitution, you cannot say it is unconstitutional. The problem in this bill, as in clause 2.1, is about the fact that it sought to give both the minister and the president unfettered powers. You know, because the wording is about the president telling them what they must broadcast and what they should not broadcast. And that should not be part of the obligations of the president. The president can tell them whatever he wants them to tell, but he cannot tell them not to say whatever he doesn't want to hear. You know, and I found that yesterday, I mean, we're unanimous in the fact that provision has to be changed. Okay. And so that portion which says that the president can tell them, because that would be unconstitutional, because the Constitution has already provided freedom of dissent, because that would be censorship, and censorship is bad.
We've gone past that.
You see, that is the reason why the Firm Censorship Board has now been renamed Firm Classification, because if you censor, it's against the spirit and the letter of the Constitution. And so if you say that the president can tell people what to say and what not to say, and similarly, there was another provision there which says that the minister will give directions. And directions can be some amorphous kind of thing, because direction means close down. Close down to is a direction. But the minister is not clothed with that power, because the Constitution is clear that the executive should not be involved in any way in interfering with the processes of the media. And so to suggest, because I think that clause 2.1 talks about the fact that the minister is the one who is going to give policy guidelines. I mean policy. The minister is responsible for the formulation of policy. How can you formulate policy when you are told that you should not be involved in the way that the media
that amounts to political interference? I think.
Definitely, definitely, and that, I mean, yesterday it was pointed out that that is also unconstitutional. So it will go against the spirit of the Constitution, and legislation cannot be superior, because the wording of the Constitution is that any legislation, insofar as it is inconsistent with any provision of the Constitution, is unconstitutional.
Let me welcome Professor Kwame Kaikari back on the phone line and then joining the discussion. So welcome.
Thank you.
We're talking about political interference and the emergency powers and the directions. What do you think about that?
Oh, well, I think that Mr. Ayeboafo has said it all concerning those sections of the bill that have the potential of the executive intruding in broadcasting activities. That is the very first article in the bill, 2.1 or something, or 1 something, the very first, and then the other one he has referred to, which is under the section that deals with broadcasting during emergency, national emergency conditions. And I think his explanations, there's nothing much really.
Why would we even go there and put this one there? Because like he mentioned, for instance, censorship board is now what? Film classification board. So we've gone past, I am thinking, is a stage we've gone past. Why did we go back there to include this in the bill?
Well, I think that he is a lawyer, he may explain it better, but I think that there is still a need to put something in a bill like this concerning how the media operate in very special circumstances, such as national emergency. And if you national emergency, if it is properly and precisely defined, will be something that the entire Ghanaian society would be affected, or would require that certain things are done for our security, whether the security question is in health, military, social, or whatever. So there's a need for something like that, but it must be expressed in such a way that the executive of the state does not have any powers beyond what the Constitution prescribes for it in terms of its relations with media. So, and there have been recommendations for a revision so that those portions are cleaned up and conform to what the Constitution says. So
as there is going to be constant change of government, perhaps every 4 years or 8 years, and some of these institutions, like the NCA, will have political appointments. I have reservations about how this is going to pan out smoothly, especially when you have the renewal system. You have to go back and renew and all that. Don't you see political interference in this area?
Well, the way it is, the NCA and the NMA work together, but the NMA's work, as defined in the bill, as far as broadcasting is concerned, is clearly limited to technical matters of frequency management and so on. So the way it is, the way I read it, the powers given to the National Media Commission in this bill makes it nearly impossible for, let's say, politically appointed persons in their capacity as the NCA to intrude in the work of in the work of broadcasting. So I think that, for instance, the NMC will be the organization that determines who gets a frequency. You see, so the way the National Media Commission is constituted today and the laws upon which it operates, I be comfortable with the reality that the National Media Commission is most likely to be independent at all times, and therefore one should have little fear concerning the National Media Commission becoming a conduit for political interference.
Do you share this, Mr. Eboafo?
No, definitely. I mean, that's why I told you that this is something that we started in '92. You know, because the National Media Commission is a constitutional body. You know, it's the only body whose members are not appointed by the executive. You know, electoral commission, charge, or you see them, the president giving them patches of their appointment. The National Media Commission is not like that. And the way that it is constituted, I think that we must have confidence in the building of institutions. You know, and in as far as the National Media Commission is the one that will say that you are entitled to a frequency and ask National Communications Authority to do the fiscal assignment to you. You know, as at now, it is the NCA which is responsible for whether to approve or not to approve. And that has been something that we have been fighting against, that the NCA is political appointees. Beyond that, they are responsible to the minister. And under the law, the minister can turn down a decision of the board of the NCA. You know, if the NCA board met and took a certain decision, and the minister felt he disagreed, he overturned it. You know, but that cannot happen with the National Media Commission, unless the commission itself allows itself to be used in a way that you fear. But I do not. I mean, I served there before I went there. There were other, and looking at the mien and the manifestations of the people who have gone there. I think that they understand that they have a critical role to play in the promotion of freedom of the media in particular, and therefore they will not do anything to act as a clog. And indeed, if the National Media Commission were minded to do that, they will have done that in their first term. Because in their first term, I mean, there was a government that was willing to have passed laws, because the provision there is that one of the functions of the National Media Commission is that to take all appropriate measures. And when you say to take all appropriate measures, is everything. They could have done so, but they felt that they had a duty of expanding the frontiers, on strengthening democracy rather than closing that. And I think that philosophy has guided the commission up to this point. And that's one of the reasons that sometimes they bemoan when we in the media do not demonstrate sufficient understanding of our freedom and we abuse it. I mean, they bemoan that kind of thing, that they think that we should do more. And as
it's like they're fighting for something we are taking for granted. As
the years go by, we should be improving in our practices to the benefit of our people.
And we come back and talk about whether we have improved or we have stayed at one place and not growing at all. Stay with us. Welcome back on PM Express. We're talking about the broadcasting bill, and I still have with me Mr. Yabudu Ayeboafo. Mr. Ayeboafo, tell me about the role the NMC will play in this bill.
In fact, the NMC will be the focus of this bill in terms of the management of the media environment. You know, it's the NMC which will determine who must get a frequency. And so after the NMC has decided that, then the NCA will then assign. As I gave, let me give a very mundane example. For instance, that at least at my place as an executive member, I'm entitled to a car, right? And so it is not the accountant who will determine whether I get a car or I don't get a car. But somehow, because he knows the position of a financial position at any given time.
Okay.
And therefore, even though I'm entitled to a car, if there's no money, he will have to explain that there's no money. So what the NCA then will be is that the NCA will be providing technical services to the National Media Commission. So that, for instance, if the frequencies in Accra are jammed, but there are frequencies in, say, Ashanti region, then they will advise the NMC not to grant a frequency in Accra, but to look at that is the rule. So from now, the functional distance will reside with the NMC.
But up till now,
no, up to this time, NMC has no role at all in allocation of frequencies.
But when there's a problem,
when somebody goes and brokers rape Suhum, then everybody is looking up to NMC to discipline the person, but NMC doesn't know how the person got the license. So that is a good thing. I mean, in fact, that's why a lot of us are happy about this law, because we know that if the allocation of frequency is in the hands of the NMC, the question of political patronage would not arise. Okay. Because there will be more independence, there will be more transparency. And indeed, the NMC is not just going to do that. The law requires the NMC to set up certain committees that would have direct responsibility. They have a committee. It's even established. It's going to establish a fund, that will look at the development of the electronic media generally. There will be a broadcasting standards committee. There will be all that. So they are going to work in that manner. And therefore, and in some of the committees, for instance, the NCA, we have a representation there.
Okay.
But in all in the composition is such that where there are 4 members of the NMC, there may be 2 of the NCA.
Okay.
So even if the NCA were even powerful as it is, when they go at the committee level, the others would whittle down that can, because we do not want them to exercise power that we may think is informed by political consideration. We have seen that sufficiently enough that some people get frequency. And the last time we were discussing that, it came out that sometimes somebody gets it in 2 days. Somebody has been waiting for 10 years. He has not even gotten a reply that, oh, we are looking at your application. And those are politically motivated. And we don't want that kind of thing to go on. And again, one of the controversies and that yesterday was there are some provisions in the law which says that certain categories of people should not be granted frequency.
And these categories include
political parties, religious bodies, and then the one that aroused controversy, this is politically exposed. Politically exposed persons. But the law it provides definition of who politically exposed person, the president, the vice president, ministers of state, members and chairman.
We already have so many of these religious channels on there.
Yeah, but when the thing, they are
at the time of renewal.
Because as of now, I don't know whether there's any religious
especially
body
TV
that owns. No, they don't own a station. They will be producing programs which are aired on some other
on the digital terrestrial network. You have them. So I wanted us to talk about the digital migration.
That is where the problem is, because if this law becomes law, it means that those stations will have to cease functioning. The digital migration, we are going there. That is what the world is. I think that the minister
is it taking care of the digital migration?
There are some. I think that yesterday it came out that it has not sufficiently addressed
we're waiting to get there before
digital migration, because there's another law, something. But yesterday, there were concerns that some of the issues and the GBC offered, they're going to present some paper, I mean, to the minister. I mean, because it is still a draft, you know, and it is after some of these considerations, including the stakeholder meeting yesterday, before it may go to cabinet, for cabinet to look at it, and then if cabinet is satisfied, it will go to parliament. And even when it goes to parliament, you know the process. Parliament will give it to the appropriate committee, and there will be invitation to everybody who has anything to submit. And so we are hoping that these discussions will stimulate people, and when the time comes, and people will make submissions. And then when the law has been passed and the regulations are to be made by the National Media Commission, again, I mean, there will be processes of consultation in building.
I've heard some conversations about how easy it is for you to be put on air, especially for TV. Because if you have the money, going to be, especially for the digital one.
No, you know, there's going to be a platform. There's a common platform. It will not, it's not that easy. You know, apart from the internet people, even that we are asking them to look at those things, because there's going to be a service provider who will own
the
service
platform. Provider Kenneth?
That one I don't know, because but the important thing is that there will be a service provider, and so you will set up your station, you produce all your programs, and you have to pass through that to get out. And therefore, I mean, if you are not authorized, you cannot, you know. So maybe that digitalization, because it has not been properly done, maybe that's why
I'm surprised this doesn't adequately cater for it.
Because you know, I told you that this is over 10 years old, and it's been pushed more by agitation, by civil society. We have been part of the coalition on the broadcasting law, and we have had series of meetings, draft That's why we are all praying that, I mean, this time around we will accept some of the, I mean, those extremes that appear unconstitutional, remove them. The generality of the thing is good. That's why, for instance, the question about Giba, whether you should own 3 or 4, I think that for a start,
that is another debate.
We need to trade.
I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to talk about that.
If some of those things are going to stall the passage of the thing, then it may become necessary that we trade off, because the law is not cast in stone, right? As we move along and the environment becomes more sanitized, we can review them. Even the Constitution has been reviewed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yawedu Ayeboafo. He has so much to say about the broadcasting bill, and I'm sure we'll have this conversation again. My name is Martha Krensolakwa. Thank you for watching.